Welcome back to another episode of Direct Edition. I'm your host, Dave, from the West Coast Davengers, the comic book guy that also has a podcast. Today I'm bringing you my interview with comics superstar Chip Zdarsky. Chip got his start in the independent and self-published scene in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, And my first experience with his work was the book Sex Criminals, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. Despite its title, it is one of the funniest, most poignant, and amazing comic books to ever hit the industry in the last 50 years of comics. His real name is Steve, but I don't address him by his real name because if I did, he would shrink and disappear. So I call him by his pen name, Chip. But he's a great writer. He's been writing everything from Spider-Man to Daredevil to Batman to his creator-owned stuff with Image. We touch on as many of the aspects of his career that I could get to within about an hour and 20 minutes. He's funny. He's also, his humor is self-deprecating. I really appreciate that about him. But he's been one of my favorite writers in comics in the last 20 years. And it was just such a pleasure to talk to him. And I think you'll enjoy listening to me and him converse. It seemed like we hit it off. I started it off with a little bit of a joke, and I think that helps break the ice because he's got such a great sense of humor about him. If you've read any of his books, he is just throwing jokes in left and right. Before we get going, I just want to say thanks to everybody that subscribed to this podcast. We are now on our 16th episode and racing towards 20. And like I said, it's not going to always be about comics. A lot of times it's just not going to be about comics at all. But I cannot deny the nature of the beast that is me or my love of comics. I'd appreciate it if you would follow me on YouTube as well. You could find the link in the description. Unless you're listening to this on YouTube, then you can find my other YouTube channel at West Coast Davengers. It's that simple. You just click it. Click it and don't get a ticket, right? That's what they say. Without further ado, I present to you my interview with Chip Zdarsky. Welcome back, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and germs. I have a special guest for you. It's a Canadian fellow. He's a sex criminal. Gary, a sex criminal? What? Oh, he's a co-creator of the comic book Sex Criminals. It's Chip Zdarsky. Wow. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Also, currently writing Batman, Avengers Twilight, finished up Stillwater, New Burn's coming out on we got New Burn coming up, Spider-Man Life Story, and obviously, yes, the co-creator of Sex Criminals, Mr. Chip Zdarsky. How are you?
Woo, how's it going?
Yeah, sorry about that. The notes you get from your producer.
You've got to fire your producer. That's the only way out of this.
Yeah, I do. Gary, we'll talk after this.
No, I mean, I did it to myself. Like, if you Google my name, the word sex criminals comes up. So thank God I'm married because I would never be able to date.
Yeah, and you live in Canada, so, I won't tell anybody from the border crossing anything.
Thanks. Yeah, up until recently, there was actually a law on the books in Canada about comic books that you couldn't have comics that depicted sex or crime. And I broke both of those laws, so I think they finally changed it.
You did, and you're currently breaking it. I mean, with New Burn, you got the crime down pat. So
yeah, he's not much of a sex guy, but yeah, good crime for sure.
So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about a multitude of things, but I like to just go back and ask the question that I like to ask everybody is, what was your first experience with comics and also a comic store, if to the best of your recollection?
Yeah, none of your business.
All right, fair enough. That's good. We'll go to the next one.
I have some vague memories of comics around the house when I was like 5 or 6 that my parents would just kind of pick up for me, like a big Superman Treasury edition, one of those oversized ones about the Fortress of Solitude. I just distinctly remember that cover. I remember like an Amazing Spider-Man issue, but the one that kind of like that I bought that hooked me was Secret Wars issue 7. That was the one where I was just like, oh my god, like so much is going on. I need to find out what happens next but I also needed to find out what happened before. So that's what kind
Right.
of got me kind of looking for comics.
Mhm.
Which at the time I lived in a really small town, so we would have to drive to a slightly bigger town, and there was like kind of a nostalgia collectible shop that just
Mhm.
also happened to have comics. Um, and that was where I started to like kind of buy regularly uh, until my first official comic shop opened up in that town, which we discovered based on like an ad in a newspaper that was like, "We're buying old comics." For a shop that's opening, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And so I convinced my parents to drive me, the half an hour to the quote unquote big city, and we couldn't find it. I remember us like walking around this building, just one like where the
Oh, yeah.
fuck is the comic shop? And then we realized there was a door at the side of the building that was unmarked that took you into the basement, and
Mm.
it was a dentist office that they turned into a comic shop. So the
Wow.
front area was New Comics, which was like the reception area of the dentist, and then the
Mhm.
back area was clearly like where they did procedures, and that was all the back issues. But the guys, it was, I mean, they seemed old to me at the time, but they're young guys. They were like probably in their 20s, and they're just excited about comics, and like they're excited to have me there too, because like I was one of their first customers. This kid that just kind of,
That's awesome.
convinced his parents to drive him there, and so they excitedly showed me like around the 2 rooms and even showed me, that, they had credentials. Like one of them had a letter printed in the back of a Marvel comic and they showed it to me. I was like, "Wow." It was like meeting a celebrity
Yeah, yeah.
when you're like 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And that became my shop. Like that was like that was big for me. And then they moved to a proper kind of spot with a window and actual room and yeah, yeah, I love that place so much. It's gone now. It had the unfortunate name of Beaver Comics.
Mm.
Canada, so it gets a pass, but like, yeah,
Yeah, not exactly the one that if they existed now, they would probably have a lot of memes about them.
yeah. The funny thing is, like, so that went on for a while, and I don't remember exactly what happened. I think like one of the owners got cancer,
Mm.
and they ended up selling it to another guy who was kind of miserable. And one of his employees left and started a competing comic shop called like Thunderbolt Comics,
Mm.
and that was the cool comic shop to be at. But unfortunately, like he was just like he would host all his friends there all the time, and they would just read the books for free. It was like one of those comic book lounge style things before that was a
Yeah,
thing, and
yeah.
like so like I don't think he sold much, and it didn't last because yeah, nobody was actually buying anything except for like me and a few other kids. Like all his other buddies were just like crashing on the couch reading new issues of Ninja Turtles or whatever.
I was just gonna say it's like a store full of the guy on the couches. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's what it sounds like.
yeah,
But so you grew up in Ontario, and you did a lot of self-publishing, right?
yeah.
When you were younger. What was the scene like back then? Because Toronto and Canada's got some great comics makers throughout history. Darwin Cook, Brian Lee O'Malley, Chester Brown,
Seth.
Finch, Seth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What was it like when you were in your teens and early 20s doing some self-published stuff? What was that scene like?
Yeah, so it'd be around kind of early 20s because I moved to Toronto after going to art school.
Mhm.
And yeah, I didn't really have there was no career drive to make comics. Like I was just kind of
Mhm.
making some for fun. And the local shop was a shop called The Beguiling, which
Right.
still exists and is like
Legendary.
legendary. Yeah. And so they had a really strong consignment and independent comics section. Like
Mhm.
basically, one floor was dedicated to like cool art stuff, and the second floor was dedicated to like the superhero mainstream stuff. And so they were super supportive. Like I'd self print my book, and they'd stock 10 copies, and when they'd sell out, they'd let me know, and they'd cash me a check for
Yeah.
whatever, and I just kind of do it again. So it's super supportive. Like it's a relatively tight community in Toronto. And I was lucky enough to kind of start doing comics around the same time as a few of my friends. One of them being
Mhm.
Kagan McLeod, who
Right.
is the artist in Kaptara, did the credits for She-Hulk recently.
Mhm. Yeah.
So he's super talented, and he was making some amazing books. Infinite Kung Fu is like
Yeah.
one of the top comics of all time. So we would do comic conventions together, and we started a studio with a couple other artists, and like, yeah, it was fun. Like it was a really fun time, and I can't really speak to the community as much now that I'm old and wizened. Like I think there's a pretty strong community of kind of young creators that do
Yeah.
anthologies and stuff together. Um, but yeah, Toronto's kind of known for comics, which is nice. There's a lot of
Yeah.
shops.
Yeah, and the beguiling's the kind of the glue that held it together. I mean, comic scenes, they don't exist as much as they used to, but
Mhm.
Toronto, Brooklyn still has a tight scene. Portland,
Yeah.
Seattle, there are some places in the world that, and obviously in Europe, I think there's a lot more in Europe than there is here.
Yeah, I
But
mean, also the growth and just kind of online communities kind of changed that as well.
Mhm.
Um, you can be friends with everyone from around the world, and you can work on comics together, from the comfort of your own home. So there's less of a kind of getting together kind of
Yeah.
vibe, I think. But yeah, it was kind of internet early days when we were starting out. So yeah, you'd form friendships with people kind of all over the world, but like yeah, there's definitely like that core group in Toronto.
Yeah, yeah, and then, and you met Matt Fraction early on, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
you and him became quick friends online, right?
Yeah, online in the early 2000s when it was the Delphi forums and Warren Ellis forum was kind of the main one.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of when I discovered like um, or rediscovered comics, I guess,
Yeah.
because I'd kind of fallen out of it a bit. Like I was kind of making my own, but I didn't know much about what was going on in comics, and that forum was kind of like where I met so many people, and like Matt met Kelly Sue there.
Mhm.
So he met his life partner, he met me, his secondary life partner. Um, and like there's just like a huge list of people that were kind of lurking on that board or posting that kind of ended up in comics, like Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey. Like
Mhm.
I think they met there and started working together as well.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that kind of came from there, and it was kind of a refreshing place because you could meet people online that you were fans of forever. If
Mhm.
Mark Wade's posted, I'm just like, oh my god, I'm responding to Mark Wade. Like that's insane to me. As a young man who kind of grew up reading his stuff in my teen years. Yeah, so a lot of people kind of started with comics at that point. I became good friends with Matt there because we really shared a sense of humor,
Yeah.
and I loved his comics. And whenever I'd post mine, mostly they were online, he loved them. And yeah, after kind of years of friendship, we just finally made the decision to work together.
And so one of the things that we're gonna talk about today is that you've got, I guess it's not an omnibus, but it's the official Sex Criminals collection, which comes out the 27th, right?
Yeah, 26th, 27th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that, I don't know, like, when Sex Criminals came out 10 years ago, I was living in New York still, and I don't know why or how I had heard about that book. Maybe just because I buy a lot of Image issue
yeah.
ones, but I didn't think I read anything of Matt's at that point, and I didn't know your name at all, and
Hmm.
I picked it up, and instantly, I'm like, this is the funniest thing that I've ever read. And as it went on and each issue progressed, it became more of, this is the most poignant stuff
Yeah.
I've ever read. And it's one of those series that I champion all the time. I tell people, like, if you want to read something that's not superhero, that'll make you laugh, make you cringe, make you cry, make you think,
Yeah.
Sex Criminals is the thing. So where does the genesis of the idea come from between the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, I got to credit Matt for that. Like, I was working at the newspaper and definitely feeling a little frustrated. Like, I kind of
Mhm.
wanted to do something different. And Matt and I had just worked on a music video together
Oh, wow.
for like WFMU, which was a kind of a listener supported radio station in New
Mhm.
Jersey. We were both fans
Okay.
of one of the shows
Yeah,
on
yeah.
there, and so we helped out with their pledge drive. So we knew we could work together.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I basically just wrote him and I just said, "Hey, like, I got the itch. Like, I think you and I should just make something together." Because he was kind of on his way out of Marvel at that point,
Yeah.
so he was kind of like trying to figure out what's next, and I was trying to figure out what's next. And he just wrote back just like a simple message, like, "What about a sex comedy about a couple who, when they have sex, they stop time and they rob banks?" Boom. It
Mm.
was just that.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, "Oh fuck, yeah, of course, of course." And so I was on a work trip, and I just remember being on the train and paying for the Wi-Fi, so I could just like we could just message each other back and forth with
Yeah, yeah.
character ideas and like how it would look um, and we fleshed out a lot just within those first couple of hours of just that initial excitement about it.
Mhm.
And and then reality kind of set in, and Matt was like, just so you know, like, Image will probably print 3 issues of this, and then we'll have to beg them for money for 2
Yeah.
more, just so we can get a collection of them. Like, yeah, of course, like no one's gonna buy this. Like, it's the dumbest idea. But as we worked on it, especially kind of just figuring out issue one, um, it switched from being like a dick joke book to like, oh, this is a book about sex and relationships, and it's also
Mhm.
got dick jokes. And we started to fall in love with the characters, and I think it came through um, in those first few issues. So yeah, by the time it came out, like we still thought it was going to do whatever. I was
Yeah.
excited because it was my first big project, and I think Matt was
Sure.
excited because it was like his first kind of post Marvel thing. Um, and yeah, I mean, the day it came out, it just like it went nuts. Like
Yeah.
it was selling out everywhere, and the orders were super high, and like yeah, it just took off from there. And so
Yeah.
I worked on that book for about a year while I still held my job at the newspaper, and
Mhm.
and at some point, I was just like, I can't do both. This is this is crazy. Like it felt like such a pipe dream to be in comics, but I'm just like, I guess I'm in comics now. Like it's weird, but all right, I got to quit the newspaper.
That's crazy. I mean, it's such a, like it's just such a great story to hear that though, because and once again, my pull list was at Midtown Comics, so maybe they just recommended it to me. But I remember I'm just like the title strikes you obviously,
Yeah,
but and then the art, I'm not I was never a big cartoon strip reader,
yeah,
but it made me think of kind of stuff that I would see in the Sunday paper
hmm
when I was a kid. But then the letters column. I mean, the
oh god,
letters
yeah,
column became this thing that was it had never existed like that before. I never read people's frank honesty was amazing. And then, just what you guys did, you filled every space with a joke.
yeah,
Wherever there
yeah,
was empty space, there was a joke. And I'm like, this is, your style of humor, Matt's style of humor. I do you have anything that you look back on that's like a huge influence? Like for me, my sense of humor was easily shaped by Weird Al. Like
yeah, yeah.
I know that looking back, but is there anything that you could look at where you're like, this is one of the biggest influences on my sense of humor?
I mean, there's all the classics, CTV and Saturday Night Live,
Mhm.
Monty Python stuff. But for me, very specifically, it was Kids in the Hall because I was
Oh,
Canadian and I was a
yeah.
teenager when that was coming out, and I just like
Mhm.
I glommed onto that so hard. Um, yeah, I love it. It's funny, for my birthday one year, my parents got us tickets to go see a taping,
Yeah, yeah.
and my parents just did not understand it at all. Like, God bless them for doing this.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
they were just like, "We don't understand. We think this means our son's gay. We're okay with that." They'll bring me to a taping, me and my little brother. And there was a documentary last year about Kids in the Hall. It was like a
Mhm.
multi-part documentary, and there's a bit of footage of from kind of behind the scenes of the filming. And when they pan over in one of the shots, we're there. My
Oh,
family,
shit.
like it was the wildest thing to be watching. It was like, wait a second, like out of hundreds of episodes, like for some reason they shot that night. I don't.
Wow.
I forget if it was season 2, season 3 that we got the tickets for,
Mhm.
but like, yeah, it's just like you could just clearly see my disinterested parents and me and my little brother, and it was amazing. So I mean, that was kind of my sense of humor for sure, and
Mhm.
just jokes with buddies. And when I worked at the newspaper, I kind of eventually carved out kind of a niche as like their kind of humor columnist. So I would write
Mhm.
funny political takedowns and
Yeah.
jokes about whatever, and I do comics and videos and stuff. So yeah, I've always been, a bit of a class clown. So Sex Criminals was a good opportunity to just like really go all in, especially since I was drawing it, not writing it.
Yeah.
So the pressure was off, and I wanted to kind of add my things to it, which was mostly like background jokes and
Mhm.
and stuff, and the sex tips at the end
Oh
when I'm
my
doing the
god.
layout. Like
Wow.
Matt and I would just trade those off, and yeah, and then both Matt and I have various levels of guilt about people
Mm.
spending money on comics. So that was part of it too. We just want to give people value for their dollar.
Sure.
And yeah, those single issues were just like so full of stuff. And yeah, the letters pages were like a revelation. Like it just felt like a huge responsibility almost to these readers, like how connected they were to the book.
Yeah, I can't imagine both of you could have seen anything like that coming, but
No.
it became its own entity. Like, you guys went from being cartoonists, storytellers to sex
Yeah.
columnist.
Like we both, I mean, you know, we can both be whatever online, but I mean, we're both kind of, especially at the time, we were both 38, 39
Yeah.
when it came out. We had our head on our shoulders. We were married. So, we were able to handle all of that, I think, and like give proper advice to people and respond well, I think. I remember the first, when after the book came out, Matt was the first one of us to do a convention. I think he did like an
Mhm.
image, maybe it was like one of those image conventions.
Yeah, I
And
think it was.
he texted me afterwards and he was just like, "Hey, chum, just so you know, you're not ready for this." Like, what are you talking about? He was like, it was mostly just women who wanted to see
Mhm.
me, and they were getting me to sign dildos and butt plugs and whips, and then they would uh, lean in and just start telling me just the dirtiest stories you've ever heard, while I'm sitting next to my wife. So this is what we're dealing with now. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm so grateful that like all this happened, like I said, when I was 38, 39, and I was just like, kind of a sedentary, already feeling quite old. Um, kind of I could handle it then. I could handle
Sure.
it. If it happened when I was in my early 20s, I probably would have been off the rails. I would have been partying, just covered in
Y
cocaine, like,
yeah,
yeah. But having Matt as a partner on that book too, like we had each other's back and we supported each other a lot. Like, at the end of a convention day, we would just both hole up in a restaurant and just like, kind of de-stress together and avoid the evening parties where everyone's making terrible decisions and
oh,
mistakes.
yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, super helpful to have Matt along the way. Yeah, we really had each other's backs.
That's awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
I when you think about it just at a kind of a base level of a comic book collector, nerd, reader, like we all are, you're talking about people that, you know, didn't have the most social life, didn't have all of
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
like the go through all these relationships, and so there's a lot of repression in there on top of the fact that North America is full of sexual repression.
Yeah.
So when you think about unleashing it in a comic book format, it's like, wow, this is a
Uh,
first.
It was partly why we thought the book wasn't going to do well because um, we knew there were shops that weren't going to carry it, like especially in the
Sure.
southern states, like 100%. We made a real strong push for digital when we
Mhm.
started, thinking, we want young readers in areas where they couldn't normally access that physically to be able to get it
Yeah.
digitally. And then we were banned on Apple.
I
So like
know, I
by
remember
issue
that.
2 we were banned. So it was just like, "Oh my god." But that actually helped us because all these publications did stories on the book. Like we were a story in Wired magazine, like
I
about
remember,
about
yeah.
all this. So I'm like, okay, that helped a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Controversy sells. It does.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It turns out, um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the biggest gap between what we expected and what happened that
Mhm.
I'll ever have in my career. Like it's 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 somehow weird knowing that no matter where I'm at in my career, like
Yeah.
I'm writing Batman now, and yet
I know.
that still isn't anywhere near the quote unquote success of Sex Criminals. Like that is the life changing thing, and that is the thing that just like swept us away.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's important though. I think in, context of comic history, I mean, look, there's over my shoulder here, you've got a Just the Tips book. Like, I have gifted I have gifted people this for the last,
yeah,
8 years. I've just randomly sent it to friends, you know?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's a weird chapter for sure. So yeah, I mean, like we've had various editions and stuff over the years, and just knowing the 10th anniversary was coming up, like I always wanted it to all be in one spot,
sure.
and I didn't want it to be an omnibus because I always feel that God bless the people that read omnibuses,
On the booze, yeah.
but they are for the most part art objects that go on a shelf
Mhm.
they appeal to the collector who needs to have absolutely everything, and that's about it. I find them very hard to read, especially when they
Yeah,
get
they
to
are.
that
They're a
size.
pain in the ass.
And I want a copy people could read. So we stripped away everything. Like it's just the story
Mm-hmm.
because like I want people to view it as a novel. And a novel doesn't have like 40 pages at the back with like extended dick jokes. Like I had, not that I didn't like making those for like the hardcovers and the trades, but this is about the story. So it's just the
Sure.
story in kind of in a soft cover that people could hopefully afford. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing about sex criminals I want to touch on, I just had Becky Cloonan and Tualote on the channel.
Oh, nice.
We talked about Somna, and
Yeah.
I kind of drew a correlation. Like Somna might be the prequel to Sex Criminals because when the main character Ingrid's masturbating and a demon shows up and time kind of stops. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
There's something.
and
There's
they
something
go,
there. Are you
yeah.
saying I should get my lawyers on this?
Possibly,
Yeah.
or maybe collaborate,
Or yeah,
like
team up. Yeah, that
sleepwalking
makes more
sex
sense.
criminals,
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Oh my
Uh,
god.
but the one thing, and obviously people can see behind me, like this is just a smid, like a little smidgen of your work.
Yeah.
Um, you over the last 4 years, Newburn, Public Domain, Batman, Daredevil, All Nighter. Am I missing anything? Uh,
Stillwater.
Stillwater, right,
Life
which is
story.
so.
Yeah.
How and work balance is one thing, but how do you balance having all of the stories up here? Like, I don't understand how somebody can be that good at telling stories and have them all just sitting there waiting to come out.
I mean, for the most part, you focus really intensely for a week or so
Mhm.
to map out a story. And so if you do your job well and you kind of map it out well enough, then you can go back to it pretty easily when you're juggling things. You just go look at that big document. Okay, where are we at in the document? Okay, here. All right, that's issue this. Figure that out. Um, yeah, I mean the funny thing is like uh, uh, sometimes everything just kind of collides a little bit. Like
Yeah,
a couple of years ago, because you're working on things at different times.
sure.
Um, um, Sometimes they come out at the same time, right?
Mhm.
And I think within like a couple of weeks, I think I had like 3 issues hit the stands in which each one had a scene of somebody standing near a funeral in the rain. Like the most hack thing I could think of, right? Like it's just like it's so cliche.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh man, like maybe I need to like step back a little bit and like have a bit more focus so I don't just keep redoing the things from issue to issue. So yeah, so it can definitely bite you in the ass. But I think as long as you're proper at planning, I know too many comic creators who quote unquote wing it, and I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
how the hell you do that because like when I have to sit down and start writing, like I need to start writing. Like I can't dilly dally and wait for the muse.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that I mean, I guess everybody's creative process is different, but the winging it thing, I won't name names, but one of my favorite creators winged a Batman Spawn book
yeah.
like a year and a half ago. I wonder who it could be. It was dog shit. And he was on record talking about how he just wrote it last minute. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I read it.
I mean, yeah, even mildly anticipating that it's going to be one of the top selling books of the
Yeah,
year. That's like that just gives me a bunch of stress. I don't know, there are some writers who like have great careers being able to do that. Like I know,
sure.
Mark Wade plans, but he's also been on record saying that he likes to write himself into corners. Like
Mhm.
he'll give himself a cliffhanger and then he's got to figure his way out of it the next issue. But he's so good at it that like you don't see those seams. If he never mentioned that to anyone, no one would know. But personally, that stresses me just the fuck out. Like I
Yeah.
can't. Like Daredevil, it was like a 3 4 year run, and like
Mhm.
I planned out most of it pretty early on. Just
Yeah.
like there were certain breaks and things that moved around and things that changed, but like I at least knew the overall kind of structure.
Yeah, and
And yeah,
you did a great job hitting those beats going
yeah,
into and out of Devil's Reign.
thanks.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it. And that's a character. It's interesting because obviously Mark has a great run on it, and Bendis has a
I
great
guess.
run on it.
I suppose.
And then Granddaddy Frank has the one that kicked it off. But
Yeah, yeah.
it it's one of those things where like he shouldn't be as good as he is, but everybody has taken their shots and really hit it. And see, the Daredevil's one of the characters that really got you into superhero books, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it showed me what they could be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I was buying Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Superman, X-Men, like all those kind of books, and then I got into Daredevil with Ann Nocenti, Darmida
Mm-hmm.
Jr., and it was wild. It was wild. Like the characters were so rich and interesting, and the stories were um, both grounded and really out there. And Nocenti had a voice, like a very specific voice,
Yeah.
which I couldn't really at that age. I couldn't quite, just distinguish in comics very well, but I saw her voice and I was like, oh, this is something different. Um, yeah, that definitely hooked me. Daredevil's just like a title that I think creators shine on because it's so removed from everything else. Like he's
Yeah.
not an Avenger, he's not an X-Men. Like um, you can kind of like separate a bit from the Marvel universe and kind of tell your own story. And it's thanks to Frank Miller because
Sure.
he just went and did his own thing, which was very against kind of what Marvel had coming out at the time, and it worked. And if it
Mm-hmm.
works, Marvel will let you do it again. And Nascenti kind of did the same thing, and it worked. And like especially once you hit like you can kind of tell in runs when like Marvel starts to interfere a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
editorial, and those tend to not work as well. But then you see like Bendis and Brubaker hitting that book
Yeah.
and blowing it up again, and yeah, like being allowed to do that. Like, I often say like I had I had Matt Murdock not in the Daredevil costume for like what 10 issues? I don't know.
It
It was
was
a
a
long
while.
time. It
Yeah.
was a while. Um, there's no way, there's no world where I would be allowed to do that on Amazing Spider-Man. Like, there's just
No.
no chance. Like, that's Marvel's flagship character. It's got to check certain number of boxes. There are certain rules associated once you're at that level. But Daredevil's so removed from it all. You can do whatever. It's a sales dip. They'll let you know, and you're gone.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
can maintain quality and you can kind of maintain sales, and they'll let you keep going because they also know that those are the books that sell forever. Like
Mm-hmm. They're
like the
evergreen.
yeah, like most Daredevil runs are ones that will always be in print in some form, or available in some form because those are the easiest ones for people to kind of get into and to see the possibilities in a Marvel comic.
And in what you were saying about, like Spider-Man is flagship, obviously. Spider-Man is one side of a great New York based book. But I think that one of the reasons why Daredevil works so well too is because it's the darker side of a New York based book. Like, there I can't remember what issue. There's some issue on the Romita Jr. run where he's in the subway, and
Mhm.
I grew up in New York, I worked in Manhattan, and I'm like, yeah, this is the feel. This is what
Yeah.
it feels like. This is,
Well, that was also, I mean, Nocenti and Ramita, like they both lived in New York during that period.
yeah, that's right. That's
And
right.
like my understanding, I got to talk to Anne a couple of times and interviewed her
Yeah.
once. And I think she was saying at some point, I might be misremembering, but like that, like John would excitedly like send her drawings of like a kid he saw on the street. Like, we got to do something with this kid. And like, all of a sudden there'd be a story about this kid. Like that was just kind of that feeling. Like, I think they just bounced off each other back and forth as like kind of New York people during a
Hmm.
period when that city looked like a
Oh my
Daredevil
god.
comic, right?
Yeah.
Like now we kind of artificially make it
Yeah.
look like a Daredevil comic because we're kind of stuck in that period, and it's kind of more interesting. But yeah, like that's the heyday as far as I can
No, you're
tell. Yeah.
right. I never really thought about it until I was older, like how many of those books like that even, from the 50s through, maybe the early 90s or early 2000s that really felt like New York books.
Hmm.
And then, now it's a completely different city.
Yeah,
Than
like you could have Daredevil getting a $10 latte for sure, in Hell's Kitchen, but yeah,
yeah, it just doesn't
yeah,
work.
no,
It doesn't hit the same way.
no,
Um, Going back to the writing stuff, one of the through lines through, pretty much everything that's behind me, Life Story and Stillwater, Avengers Twilight, which I'm really enjoying.
cool,
Aging is, the huge plot line, and we're not too far apart in age,
yeah,
but
similar
it's
beards.
yeah, similar beards, exactly. Um, it's something that I think, going back to Frank Miller did it really well with Dark Knight.
Mhm.
But I think it's something that's been kind of missing, in comics in the last 20 years that I feel. But it's something that you do real well. Is that just kind of like where your head is typically at, or do you enjoy writing that aging kind of storyline? Like Stillwater is a book about people that don't age, and
Yeah.
Avengers Twilight is the opposite, and then Spider-Man Life Story is a real-time, telling of his story through the decades.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really gone too deeply in terms of my thought process on that. Um,
Mhm.
but but I mean, I've always been fascinated with that sliding timeline, especially in the Marvel comics,
Yeah.
and the reasons for it and how it's implemented. Um, yeah, like the fact that like Peter Parker aged until he hit like 28 or whatever, and then Marvel's just like, wait a second, if we keep aging him, like we're screwed. Like
Yeah.
Spider-Man would have been done like 40, 50 years ago. Um, and then I'm also fascinated by the problems that arise from it, like the
Sure.
introduction of children and teen characters and things like that. Like, Spider-Man went from being a teen to like, a 20 something. Um, but like if that character debuted now, he'd just be 15 forever probably,
He
because
definitely will.
that's kind of what happens, right?
Mhm.
Kamala Khan's gonna be a certain age. Like maybe she goes to college, maybe, but then like, how
Yeah.
do you deal with that? Because that's definitely a finite period of time. Like she'll have to leave. Um, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting to me to watch the kind of the piling up of characters that
Mhm.
aren't actually able to kind of get out of those phases of their life. Um, or else they'll butt up against the characters that Marvel doesn't want to age as well. Like Kamala Khan can't grow up to be 28, and all of a sudden she's the same age as Spider-Man, who's also 28. So what do you do? It's fascinating to me, like especially considering how much happens to these characters within the confines of this comic book universe. Um, it's very tricky to write because you'll get on a book and you'll be like, "Oh, I'm going to use this character," and then you realize
Mhm.
everything's happened to them and they should
Yeah.
be locked away in an insane asylum.
They should be
Like
dead.
like Peter Parker can't walk down the street with like Flash Thompson and Betty Brant just having coffee and joking about the day, considering all the shit they've gone through. Like you have to ignore, as a writer, you kind of have to ignore a lot of the things that have happened to these characters, or else
Yeah.
they're no longer human beings.
And
Like, yeah,
then you
it's
butt up
it's
against
tricky.
continuity,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Like
know?
continuity helps you as a writer and it hurts you as a writer.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
there's definite benefits to it. The example I always use is like if I write a story about an old woman getting hit by a bus, no one cares. If I write a story about Aunt May getting hit by a bus, people care because the
Mhm.
continuity has helped me there. It's given emotional
Yeah.
resonance that's carried through to what I am going to do to the characters. Um, so it can help, but also you look at Aunt May's wiki; she's been hit by 19 buses. Like, what else can we do to this poor
She's
old
been
woman?
Yeah, she's dead like 16 different times.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's getting harder, I think, to kind of figure out what to do with the characters.
And I think that's why I do gravitate towards the limited series on the superhero side, like Life Story. You're
Yeah,
in, you're out. You Spider Shadow, you're in, you're out. Great story. Um, I guess assume Avengers Twilight 6 issues. I haven't
yeah,
been keeping okay, so
yeah,
and it's great. And Daniel's art style for that, it's almost like
yeah. He's gorgeous.
yeah, it's hard to explain. Like I get vibes of Darwin Cook, Art Deco type,
Yeah.
old timey. I don't even know what, I'm not that
No, no,
versed
no. I
in.
get it. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Daniel's amazing, and
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I like the out of continuity limited series. The catch, the trick is always getting people to care about the characters when they're quote unquote not in continuity.
sure.
So that that makes it a harder job. But I like the challenge of it too. Like I think by the end of Spider-Man Life Story, if you're not shedding a tear,
Yeah.
I haven't done my job. Um, yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
I consider, and I there's always open discussion about Spider-Man stories. I don't
Mhm.
think there have been that many great Spider-Man stories, but Life Story and Spider-Man Blue are the first two that kind of come to my mind when I think of great contained Spider-Man stories.
Yeah, Craven's Last Hunt. Like
Yeah.
you have a few. that's the tricky part. And I think about this a lot working on Batman, which is um, it's a different world than it was when comics were being made, maybe in the 80s, 90s,
Hmm.
where you could just kind of like pause the story for like 3 4 months and do like the last hunt,
Sure.
like a self-contained kind of thing. Um, but the nature of kind of monthly comics is really the to be continued of it all. So it's very hard to kind of have an ending to a story. Um, I think Batman Year One was published in Batman. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
wild. That's
4
wild
issues.
to me.
Yeah,
And at the time, there's still letters writing in just like, "What is this garbage?" Like, which is
well,
insane. But yeah, like, I think that's harder to do now. Like even, I did Joker Year One, but like I still had to
mhm,
make sure it tied into the story. Like
right.
it's not a standalone by any means. I think you can read it and kind of get it on its own, but I'm in service to the monthly comic book reader and the comic shops that want to keep people buying that particular book month after month.
Sure.
Um, so it becomes tricky. So yeah, the miniseries off to the sides. I mean, Spider-Man is a really tricky one because there aren't many kind of standalone Spider-Man stories just
Yeah,
off on their own. Like Amazing Spider-Man was just like boom, 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 things keep happening, and like the stories were big. Like Superior Spider-Man, I think is a great story, but it's also like
yeah.
how many issues is that?
30, 20 something? I don't it's a
It's a
lot.
lot. It's a
Yeah,
lot, and so that's not a book you hand somebody be like, yeah, you interested in Spider-Man? Yeah, check this out.
right.
They've got to be within that 5 to 12 issue kind of range for that to really work and be kind of perennial bestsellers, and that's hard. Like I think the companies need to kind of. I mean, DC's been doing a good job with the Black Label stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I think in a traditional comic book format, the companies could be doing better and a bigger push into like just stuff like, yeah, not to toot my own horn, but it's like stuff like Spider-Man Life Story or Avengers
Sure.
Twilight, where at the end of those, I got a text from Mark Bagley the other day,
Mhm.
asking me a question about something, and then he just kind of mentioned, he's like, "Man, I signed so many of those life stories at conventions," and that's Mark Bagley, who's like who's
He's
worked
Mr.
on,
Spider-Man.
yeah, he's worked on a lot of Spider-Man, and I'm just like, well, yeah, because that's like, and same here, and just because it's like it's a done in one that you can hand somebody and be like, check this out.
Yeah,
You don't need previous knowledge. Previous knowledge helps. Obviously, it enhances the story for some people, but you're telling a full story.
yeah, and it was something that hadn't been done before, and, Spider-Man, in my opinion, and, it's just my opinion, but it's always been the artist's book. It's never really been like the writer's book, Ditko and Ramita and Todd and Larson and Bagley. Sure, we remember David Michelini was the writer on a lot of that, but it was never a writer's book because he's a very dynamic character to draw.
Yeah.
Um, so
During that period, yeah, like in the '60s through into kind of early '90s,
yeah,
absolutely. Um, then the speed of it, I think, changed that a lot. And Clone
mhm,
Wars and stuff like that changed that.
yeah,
Like once you put Dan Slott on the book, that's Dan Slott's book
yeah, or
because
Straczynski.
yeah, because they were on it for long amounts of time, especially Dan, and so
Mhm,
there were a lot of artists, great artists that worked with Dan, but like they can never really they can't really claim the book the way Dan did as
sure.
a writer. And that's a problem. Like I love the fact on Batman, like Jorge
Yeah,
uh continued through from James to me, and like hopefully
yeah,
he'll continue through to the next writer. Like I love the idea of like a big collection being like Jorge Jimenez's Batman.
yeah,
Like it
yeah.
doesn't matter who the writer was. It's the reverse of how it normally goes.
It's a
Um,
lost thing, the long run from an artist and you spoke about it, like Jorge wanted to do 12 issues a year, but it's
yeah, the
not.
nature of the beast. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and you find ways to kind of get through that. Uh, yeah, like Gotham War by its nature had to have a bunch of artists, but that makes it feel a little separate, so that helps. Joker Year One, I kind of concocted as its own thing to kind of buy Jorge some time,
sure.
um, even though it still fed into the story. So and I try to use the backups to kind of flesh things out as well.
Yeah,
Um, Yeah, yeah, but it's hard. Jorge wants to draw it all, and I'm just like, you just can't. Like, we try to figure out ways to make that possible. He's super fast, but like, if DC wants like 18 issues a year, and a couple of them are giant size, like, he just can't do it.
Yeah, it's not the same as it used to be, and you know, it's things change. Everything changes. I mean, that's
Mhm.
one of my biggest gripe with comic book fans these days is how they are, and they have always been resistant to change. Where I'm just like, no, I
Oh
want
yeah,
to want to try things. I want different. I don't want, you know, I don't want my favorite band to sound the same for 30 years. I don't want, you know, the same movie franchise to keep pumping out bullshit sequels, you know,
yeah.
one after another.
I mean, it's hard. I tend to stay off of the internet
Good.
for a lot of reasons, but like the one thing I do kind of get wind of is just like readers who complain that this has been done before, and then
Change.
also at the same time complain about the changes. So it's like, all right, like, uh, I can't. That's why you can't listen to the audience. Like if you listen to the
No,
audience, it's death. Like there's a reason Chris Claremont, his X-Men was so big and so popular. It's because he never gave you what you wanted
it was
until
his.
the end. When he put them all in dimension at the end, that to me was the end of the X-Men.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that was it. He's like he gave them their happily ever after, put them in the mansion the way all the fans asked for. All the
Mhm.
popular characters are all together. They're not fighting. They're all happy together, and like creatively, like that I stopped. Like I think I
Yep.
made it 3 issues into the Lee X Men, and I was
And it
out.
wasn't, yeah, I mean,
But like
as
before that, when all the X Men were always split up, and they would bring in like random like Rogue, what the fuck is this? Like, like people hated Wolverine for
did
years when he
they?
was introduced. Yeah,
See,
yeah.
I came into comics probably right when the first ongoing series started with Wolverine, and that was my
Yeah, yeah.
introduction to it. But I mean, look, we
It
could
was a
probably
weird
go back.
book.
Yeah, and we
X Men
could.
was a weird book, and they threw in a bunch of weird characters, things that shouldn't
Mhm.
have worked. They didn't like pair characters up the way fans wanted. They split them up. All of a sudden, they're in Australia or whatever, or they're different
That's right, in the
personalities
Outback,
or
yeah.
whatever. And it sold better than ever, and everyone loved it, even though they said they hated it. Like
Well,
that's
and
just how it goes.
you could probably go back to, like, let's say issue 146 or 147 and read. I bet you people hated Days of Future Past when it came out. I bet you people were like, "What the fuck is this? You
Yeah,
killed everybody."
yeah.
And you know, obviously today, and I agree, it's regarded as one of his best stories, if not his completely best.
One of my favorite things was a few years ago. I was rereading all the Mark Gruenwald Captain America issues.
Mhm.
I had fond memories of them, and like I was doing some cap research, and I was just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go in and read them all." And I was reading them on like Marvel Unlimited, and every
Mhm.
once in a while, Unlimited has the letters pages in there. And
Okay.
so during
Yeah.
the period where Steve Rogers was booted out of being Captain America, and John Walker came in, Steve became the captain. Um, the letters pages were 100% angry, 100%. Everyone hated it. They were so mad. And like I'm reading these letters pages, I'm like I don't remember the letters pages at the time. Like I just love the book. I'm just like, my God, like if this existed online, like people would have like lost their minds. Like the fact
Oh
that these
yeah.
are letters pages where people sat down and typed them up and sent them in, and it's regarded as maybe the best Captain America story.
Yeah,
Like that
Grunwald's
period is
legendary.
so good, and like
Mhm.
from a storytelling standpoint, you can see where they're headed. Like you can see this is set up in such a way to remind people why Steve Rogers is the best Captain America by throwing
Yeah,
this
yeah.
other guy in there. He can't take it, he loses it, and then Steve Rogers has to crawl back and become Captain America. Like there's clearly an end game, but like
Sure.
when you're in it, when you're reading month to month, you're like, no, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. Like it's funny that even back then, like there were just people who had no concept of the fact that you're in the middle of a story. Like
Yeah,
they are
yeah.
like you read halfway into a novel and you're like, what? I can't believe the character's suffering. Like,
Well, and then how else are you gonna make people care about a character again? You gotta you make them
yeah,
go away and then bring them back. I mean,
yeah.
you know,
Go
there's
away, suffer. Like there's
it's a hero's
that's part
journey.
of it. It's a hero's
Yeah.
journey. Yeah.
You know, I know it's pretty legendary when Mignola did that fill-in issue for X-Force during the Liefeld run. People went ape shit. They were burning. They were like, "I'm fucking done." And
Hmm.
anybody's gonna say that about Mike Mignola now? No.
No,
No. I
no.
mean, it's sacrilege. He's one of the greats.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so there's I know you apparently you never did a Star Wars book, and you apparently pitched
No.
one to Marvel Disney.
Yeah.
Why did you want to kill the greatest Star Wars character of all time?
I mean, so they approached me and they were just like, oh, we have an anthology book and we'd love you to be in there and we really want you to do a Jar Jar story. Like that, they pitched me on doing Jar Jar. I'm like, I remember writing back. I'm like, I don't think I can type the word Misa and feel good about myself. Like it doesn't work for me. And so,
Doesn't
they
work
were like,
for
"Oh, we really
Misa.
want you to do it." So, like, I was like, "All right, I'll do it if I can kill Jar Jar." And I came up with a really good pitch, and did not make it past Lucasfilm, and so
I
I backed out of the project.
if they ask you to do it again, maybe you should just run with the whole he's the true Phantom Menace. He is a Sith Lord. I think
Yeah,
that would be a fun one to do. But
there you go.
um, you, I want to talk about your podcast real quick. You've got a podcast called Manga Splaining. So let me hear about that because I'm getting into manga over the last
Okay.
like year and change, and I just want to hear like your view of it and what you've learned.
Yeah, I mean, so before the pandemic, I did a trip to Japan with some friends of mine. I was at the Tokyo Comic Con there, and we kind of traveled around. And I don't know really anything about manga. I've only read a few books previous to that trip. But my friends that I went with, they were all in the field. Like they
Yeah.
either, they work for Viz or, they were specialists on manga. Like they knew their stuff. So on the whole trip, like we just visit all these kind of manga shops and like museums and galleries to things that I just did not understand at all. Like, to go to a giant museum dedicated to a bug that rides a motorbike, I'm just like, what is this? What is this? It seemed insane. Um, but it was a great trip though, and like I loved everything I saw. But at some point on the trip, I said to my friends, I'm like, I need to get into this deeper, and I said like, you guys should all explain it to me on a podcast. We'll call it manga splaining. Very straightforward.
Great.
And so we started. It was kind of our pandemic project that kind of kept going, where every episode we read a new volume of manga
Mhm.
that they curate and pick for me to give me a proper education. Um, and we discuss it, and they kind of answer my questions as we go. And we've done like 120 episodes, I think, at this point. Like I've read a lot of manga. I'm not even. I still feel like I just kind of barely scratched the surface. Like even though
Sure.
maybe I could be considered an expert now, but not next to my friends who actually really know the industry. So it's been amazing, and like one of the things that I kind of knew it beforehand, but I really kind of dug in as we were reading them
Mhm.
is that uh, creators. I mean, there are some creators in the Japanese market that like obviously make books designed for success. Like there are a lot of kind of like derivatives and knockoffs and like that kind of Naruto uh,
Yeah.
kind of journey. Um, or you'll find, all of a sudden, oh, there's like a million, a million joke books about the Yakuza because one does well. Like any market, there's stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, what I really loved was all the manga that felt like it was just the creator being like, "Oh, I'm interested in this. I'm going to make a comic about it."
Yeah,
So like I don't know, ping pong
cooking
or
or food, yeah.
cooking. Yeah, a lot of food. Salary man, like business deals and stuff like that.
Mhm.
There was one that I really liked about like a woman trying to become a radio DJ. Like
Huh.
these are things that you don't see a lot in the North American comics market,
Yeah.
um, because we're really hemmed in by genre bashing. Like, oh, this is like a new twist on a vampire story, or this is
Yeah.
like a western meets a sci-fi, or it's a sci-fi meets superhero, or it's a superhero meets
Dracula.
whatever Dracula, which I've done. So like, I get it. Uh, but we there's definitely these weird constraints that we kind of put on ourselves, and there's not a lot of books about kind of real stuff.
Yeah.
Um, those tend to be kind of uh, on the Fantagraphics end of things, which
I was just gonna say that, yeah.
Drawn and Quarterly, which obviously great books, but maybe not mass market books the way they are in Japan.
Hmm.
And so that fascinated me, and it's kind of what spawned Public Domain.
Which is a fantastic book. I just caught up on the 7th issue last night.
Oh, cool.
Uh, I I read the first issue when and once again, everybody needs to go subscribe to Chip's Substack, $5
Oh
a month.
yeah.
You get free comics. You get to, get this great newsletter that literally makes me laugh every single fucking time I read it.
Oh man, thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I put a lot of work and love into that newsletter. Weirdly.
It's great though. Like I look forward to it. Like when I get that email, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna save this for when I need a
Oh,
little laugh, a little levity in my life.
that's
But
awesome.
Public Domain is this great book, and it kicks in like the fifth and sixth and seventh issue. The second arc of it really started to grab me because you really get into, you know, I don't want to say taking shots, but being very honest about the comic book industry
Yeah.
overall. Um, and it was really refreshing. And I want to actually pull a quote out of here.
Okay.
In the seventh issue, it really made me laugh. The editor, Miss Dan, right? Miss Dan.
Yeah. Yeah.
She refers to the change in direction in the comic books needs to be more than masturbating fans in their 40s. And it's like where we are today, especially with the online discussion, the
Yeah.
YouTube stuff that I'm part of, but I push back against is like
Yeah.
comics really need to be focused on being for everybody instead of just for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, there is a market obviously for specific types of fans, and
yeah.
um, I think that's fine. If you want to make books for a specific type of fan, go for it. It's just not all of them.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah, so I mean, Public Domain is like, yeah, it's fictionalized, but obviously I'm pulling stuff from kind of real life and maybe some feelings I have or feelings friends have. Um, but yeah, I it came about because of manga splaining, because like I stopped and I thought to myself like, well, what interests me?
Mhm.
If this guy's doing ping pong books, like what's my ping pong? And I don't really have any hobbies. My hobby is comics. That's my interest.
Same.
Like it was a very sad kind of realization. Um, uh, that well, all I have is comics, but I leaned into it. I'm like, I really love comics history, and I voraciously consume interviews with comic creators. Um, so this is basically my reflection of that. Like that's my interest. So yeah, I made a comic about comics, like the hacker that I am.
Yeah. Well, you really I think for anybody that's really, into the love of reading comics and like you said, comics history, it's the perfect book. And it's got your
Oh,
humor,
cool.
it's got your art. It's the chip package, uh, you know,
Yeah.
which I guess probably starting this with sex criminals and then going to Chip's package. All right, I've put myself into a corner.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
but yeah, it was refreshing because I had read the first issue when it first came out, and then I went in preparation for this. I wanted to get into it, and you won an Eisner for it,
Yeah.
which
Shockingly.
yeah, well, who's got this one? Is did somebody steal it from you? Is
No, I
Stegman
I
holding it
I
hostage?
finally got it from my editor Allison, who accepted it on my behalf, and it
That's
is a
right.
little bit broken. So there's got to be something.
And I think there needs to be more people doing what you're doing in comics because I just, when you mentioned Allison, I forgot about the YouTube channel you have
Oh
with a
yeah,
couple
chip
of
class.
videos. Yeah, the chip class. Like I, comics as a medium, humor was, I would say, what, 50% of the existence of comics for the first, you know, 30 years. I
Hmm.
mean, war, sci-fi, horror, and then the rest of it was all humor, cartoon, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of the greatest comics that came out of EC, Mad, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
Satire. So I love that you lean into that. I'm assuming, but I'm not 100% sure. Between Sex Criminals and Public Domain, are you doing all digital? Is your or
Yeah.
you are?
Yeah. The Sex Criminals is when I switched over to all digital, just because I knew I needed to save as much time as possible.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I miss doing real drawings, which is why at comic conventions I tend to do brush and ink drawings for people,
Yeah.
just so I can kind of keep that feel going. But yeah, it's all digital, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've become a pretty big original art collector, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I've never seen a sex criminals page, and there's a reason for that, you know?
There were a few because in issue 17 we did like a criminal pastiche,
Mm,
and I wanted to kind of emulate Sean Phillips' work a little bit, so
yeah,
I printed out my pencils and I inked them traditionally. I think most of those are sold though. Yeah, yeah.
wow.
Damn, I really didn't plan that out well.
Well, you can always do, your next book in traditional. Speaking of Sean Phillips, his
Hmm.
son, Jacob,
Yeah.
and you are doing this absolutely fantastic book, Newburn, which,
Oh man.
trade paperback, first one's out, second one comes out in May, I believe,
Hmm.
like May 20 something or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about that part of your brain because this is uh, to me, it's a departure from your typical writing. You are writing hard-boiled detective, mafia, New York-based, grimy, and a great character, great characters.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, it probably stemmed from hopping over onto Daredevil,
Mhm.
kind of continuing that vibe a bit. But yeah, I mean that's a project where it's just like the idea came to me one day. I was just like, oh, I got to do this. Um, and like I've often said that I'm not necessarily smart about my career. Like if you're smart about a career, you would pick a lane and you would really build an audience in that lane.
Sure.
You know, there's a reason John Grisham does legal thrillers and Daniel Steele does romance and Stephen King does horror. Like, sure, once in
Yeah.
a while Stephen King will go off and do something else, but he knows. Come back
Yeah,
to horror.
he knows what everybody wants.
Um, so it's always been strange to me that there could be anything approaching a Chip Zdarsky fan because like who is buying Daredevil and Jughead? But you know, so Newburn was just like, oh yeah, like I love kind of police crime procedurals. So
Yeah,
what would that look like for me in a comic with the kind of restraints that I put on the project? Because I feel like as a creator, like nobody consumes one thing. You know,
yeah,
I think there's only one person in my life that like exclusively just like watches horror movies and horror shows. But like for the most part, you're just like, oh, what do we watch tonight? Oh, I'll watch this like crime show. Oh, I'll watch this like
yeah.
comedy. I'll watch this fantasy. Um, so the fact that we consume a variety of things and creators tend to not produce a variety of things always seems weird to me.
It is
Um,
weird.
you know, maybe it's just kind of the Renaissance man, you know, a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. I'm just so at a bunch of different genres. But yeah, Newburn was a fun project because being able to kind of develop those muscles, I think
Yeah.
it's probably helped me as a writer in other ways.
Is it gonna end at issue 16? Is that
Yeah, yeah. 16's
okay?
the end. It's all done. It's at the printers as we speak. Yeah, I'm sad to see it go, but like I had the ending in mind from the beginning, so it's kind of nice to be able to hit it. 16 issues is a pretty good run at Image, I think, these days.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I agree with that, and,
Yeah.
it like I said, it felt different, Jacob's art is
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
fantastic. The
he's
apple did
awesome.
not fall too far from the tree,
No,
at all.
no, not at all. Yeah, he's amazing, and like um, much like myself on Public Domain or Sex Criminals, like Jacob's doing all of it. Like he's drawing it, coloring it, lettering it. Like he's a force. It's
Yeah.
pretty wild to watch.
Yeah, and, there's not a lot of that out there these days, the only other really person that comes to mind, and he's writing too, is Daniel Warren Johnson.
Yeah, yeah,
He's doing a lot, but he's not the colorist. And then obviously, I don't wanna talk spoilers with Avengers Twilight or Batman, and,
sure,
to be fully honest, I'm not fully caught up on Batman, but I do have, I did read Failsafe, and obviously I'm
cool.
4 issues into Avengers Twilight, but those are your 2, well, I guess Twilight you're probably done with, but,
Hmm.
what's the experience of now writing the biggest comic book character, period?
It's the same as writing Howard the Duck.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like weirdly, it is because like I don't know, the number of pages is the same. Like the amount of work I put into it is the same.
Is the
And because I'm
pressure a little
well,
bit more?
a little bit only because you have more meetings about it, right?
Sure.
Like, Batman shows up in a lot of books. So, like, if you're
Yeah.
gonna give that guy a haircut, like, you have to have a meeting about it. Like, you can't just go ahead and give him a haircut because it's got to be
Mhm.
reflected everywhere. Whereas Howard the Duck, I could shave all of those feathers off and have no problems. And I tend to turn off the part of my brain um, uh, that would normally deal with like the stress or responsibility of it all. Like,
Mhm.
I'm a pretty diligent worker, like just on whatever project I'm doing. So DC doesn't usually have to worry about me like falling behind or whatever,
Right.
or fucking up too much. Um, so it's been like weirdly very straightforward. Like
Yeah.
it was a in the beginning it felt like there was a rush because I kind of came in late because James left and I had to wrap a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff. And then when I jumped on Batman, I was like, all right, okay, we got to go. Um, but like now I'm like Jorge's a really fast artist, and I'm like 40, 50 pages ahead of him.
Oh, wow.
So I'm feeling good. Um, yeah, yeah, it's been fun. But yeah, there's just more meetings. That's really all there is to it. Like even
Right.
just creative meetings with like the writers of the other big titles, if we're kind of planning out events and things like that.
Mhm.
You have to think about that stuff too.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's intermingled with everything in that company.
yeah.
You just released the Spider-Man omnibus came out a couple weeks
Hmm.
ago, or a month ago. Uh, but it really showcased one of the things that you're I guess you went to school for design, like your design of
Yeah.
that book and your design overall. Is that something that sometimes bleeds into when you're sending a script out? Like you visualize certain things that you're like, "Oh, could you maybe put this on a page to somebody like Jorge or Daniel or whatever?" Or is it just 2 separate pieces of Chip?
Um, I give a lot of notes for sure when I'm dealing with artists.
Mhm.
I'm sure they hate it, but I can't turn that off. And it's almost all storytelling. Like if something isn't working in terms of the storytelling, I'll send notes on that. Um, with design stuff, if I could do it all, I would. Like
Sure.
I tend to design most of my logos, even on the Marvel DC stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, yeah, like, and it's not even. I don't want to disparage like the in-house kind of designers of these companies because there's some great designs coming out of these places. But just for me personally, I'm like, oh, I know the feel of a thing that I want, and so I should probably just go ahead and design it. And sometimes it's even small tweaks. Like I cleaned up the Daredevil logo a little bit. There were some
Yeah.
things in there that bothered me, things that didn't quite line up, and I'm just like, I spent like a day just like slowly moving things, and then I'm just like, what if we bled it off the page? So so even in the logos are quite good to start with. Like I still want to get in there and fiddle a little bit to work with what
Yeah.
I'm doing. Whenever I can, it gets harder. Like the longer I'm in the industry, the harder it is to kind of carve out the time to just do that stuff because I'm usually doing it all on my creator owned, and that obviously takes precedent.
Sure, sure. Yeah, public domain shines in that. And the
Yeah.
covers that you did and the design that you did for Spider-Man Life Story knocked it out of the park.
Thanks.
Um, I did want to ask, we talked about Clowes when I met you at Emerald City.
Hmm.
Is there certain books that you look at that are huge? And it doesn't have to be Clowes, but just in general, comic wise, are there any books that are super influential on everything that you've done going forward? Just as like a blueprint, something that you've read a bunch or you go back to a lot.
Subconsciously, probably like my
Yeah.
favorite. It's funny on manga splaining, we reversed it recently where I got them to read Daredevil Born Again.
Oh, cool.
Um, and that was a treat, kind of giving that another reread. I've got the giant artist edition of it because I think
Yeah,
it's a masterpiece,
it is.
art wise. And I think it's just a really tight, perfect example of like a cool story that's told within like 5 issues. Like it's really,
Yeah.
really, really great. Um, yeah, that's kind of the one I always kind of go back to, and I studied that a lot, especially when I started writing Daredevil, because there are
Hmm.
things in there that Miller and Mazzucchelli did that aren't really done that much now.
No.
That I tried to emulate at least in a few issues, like scene changes in the middle of a page. That doesn't happen a
Yeah.
lot. And I noticed when I was doing the reread, I'm just like, oh, it ratchets up the tension because you don't expect it, and it really kind of like bouncing you back and forth like that really kind of keeps the momentum really going. Most writers tend to just be like, oh, end of scene, end of page, end of
Yeah.
page,
Yeah.
new scene. Like, oh, it doesn't have to be that way if you can structure your page well enough. Um, Yeah,
Watchmen is a prime example of how you transition,
yeah,
like, in a way that nobody ever did before.
yeah. That's super formal versus
Yeah.
Miller Mazzucchelli, which is not formal at all. But Mazzucchelli makes it feel almost formal.
He's something else.
Yeah, it's wild. He was so young doing it too. Like the fact that he was just kind of like, and you can see the progress over those 5 issues, which is wild.
Yeah.
And then he went and did Batman Year One, which is like almost a reinvention of his style.
Yeah, and
And
that
then he left. He just left Marvel and DC, and he went and did Rubber
he was
Blankets
done.
and Asterio Pala and City of Glass, and it's just like amazing, amazing. Like the fact that he could. I know he teaches, but like he could just legit retire off those
Oh, yeah.
2 books.
Yeah, and the Batman, Year One Artist Edition's coming out in June. That's
Oh,
gonna be a treat to see.
oh my
Uh,
God! I hope they printed enough copies because man, oh man, everyone I know is buying one.
yeah, I gotta pre-order one because I'm I don't wanna miss out. I don't wanna be left trying to buy that on the secondary market
Yeah,
because it's just a pain. I mean, um
but I was gonna say to actually properly answer it.
yeah, yeah.
Probably my most influential book was Justice League International. Given
Okay.
to Matthias, Kevin McGuire, Hughes, like, um, yeah, I think it's a perfect superhero comic
Huh. I don't
because
never read
it's
it.
oh my god, I think it still holds up too. It's it's a period where Justice League was funny,
Mhm.
but it was funny, but it also had heart, and also when the stakes were introduced, they were high, and they felt even higher because you'd already fall in love with the characters and the humor of it. So when things got dark, it was like, wow, like this really, really hits hard.
Okay.
Just a perfect combination of creators and just the the building up of character in that run. Like everyone's very distinct and they find their voice and yeah, there's spin-offs, Justice League Europe, and like I said,
Yeah, I
Justice
remember
League
those.
America International, the quarterlies. I bought all of them. I couldn't get enough. Like, it was fun superhero comics.
That's late '80s, right? Like
Yeah,
87, 88, 89. Yeah.
yeah. It was one of those ones I came to it late, and I had to go back and like kind of hunt down the previous issues, but it was well worth it. Yeah, I love that.
All right. Those are good to know. And I did want to ask, if you look down, I don't know if you can see the border that's on here, but you've
Mhm.
got your promo photo, your
Oh yeah,
sunglasses. So I have to ask you
cool as hell.
only because he's Canadian, you're Canadian. Is it inspired by Bret Hart? Is it a Hart Foundation? Because I'm telling you, like
Yeah,
he
yeah, I
had
can see
those
that.
glasses and leather jacket and
Yeah, both ripped. Yeah, it makes
yeah.
sense. I think it was more inspired by Greg Capullo.
Oh god.
Yeah.
Okay, so in public domain, you've got the writer that they bring on is Carter Dusk, and
Yeah,
then the artist they bring on is Teddy Crank. Now,
yeah.
Carter Dusk is an amalgamation, I feel like, of Grant Morrison and Alan Moore, but the name, switch it around, that's Donny Cates. That's Donny Cates. And
No,
then
no, it really
no,
is
it's not?
it really is not. Donnie's got a totally different vibe from Carter Dusk. Carter Dusk is way too cool and British. If anything, Carter Dusk is pretty close to Kieran Gillen, I think.
Okay. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
is Teddy Greg Capullo, or at least inspired by Greg Capullo.
I think there's definitely elements there. Like if I've met a few artists that were just kind of like big and jacked and like super
Yeah, yeah.
pumped about drawing and um yeah, yeah, I could see it. Yeah, there's some McFarlane in there and
Yeah, oh,
the
yeah.
kind of the mannerisms and yeah, I just want a guy who just fucking pumped to draw like dudes fighting and like guns blasting and yeah. Yeah, he just loves comics.
I love it. I mean, I really do hope that everybody reads it because you don't have to know too much inside baseball. You just need to have like a base knowledge of how comics work to really understand the tones of that book. Plus, it's
Yeah.
great. If family, there's a lot of you know uh, family strife in there, and
Yeah, I mean, so to quote Vin Diesel, it's all about family.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think it's a book that could be read by anyone, and you're caught up to speed.
Yeah, yeah, you
Yeah.
do. And Stillwater's. When I read Stillwater, I got, I didn't know what it was about. Yeah, I knew you were
Okay.
writing it, and I just picked it up because it's you, and
Cool.
I really, really enjoyed it. And the story beats, and like I was saying, there were some characters that really pissed me off, but in the way that you're supposed to
Hmm.
feel when you're in a story. And I
Yeah.
think that I think that's one of the things that when I hear people complain about certain aspects of comics these days, most of it's bullshit. But there sometimes I'm just like, if you're not feeling for the characters, then there might be something lacking from a story,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and kind of drawing parallels when you're, with Born Again, Miller puts everybody through the ringer,
Hmm.
and you did a good job over time putting everybody through the ringer on your Daredevil run, and so it's that's how it
I love
feels.
to hurt people. It's my passion.
Well, you didn't hurt me yet.
Okay.
You did try to kill Jar Jar. Uh,
It's true. It's true. I tried my best.
Before we get going, I do want to mention Adrian, actual Dracula, is going to be
Mm,
interviewing you next week,
this
and
is true.
he told me to leave some marrow and some blood for him. So I don't want to drain
Look,
you too much.
between you and me, he's gonna fuck it up so bad. He's gonna come in, he's gonna try and be all jokey, and I'm just not gonna be having it.
You
I'm
just
just
got to go
not gonna be
Stone
having
Queen.
it. I'm like, don't waste my fucking time here with your little comedy routines, pal.
um and so with that, we got the sex criminals, what are we calling it,
It's
the
the
collection,
complete edition.
the complete
And you'll
edition.
notice the U or the O on the cover is a little edited to look a bit like a U. Couldn't
Okay.
quite call it the complete
The
edition,
complete edition, yeah.
but I did my best to subvert that.
That'll be out, this will be out the week, the 5 days after it comes out, so you can still pick that up.
Yeah,
New Burn Trade comes out in May. Batman next issue, I mean, it's a monthly book, so I
constantly
don't
coming out.
yeah, I don't need to tell
It'll
people
never
that
stop coming out.
Batman's out. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be the
Any
last comic to come out when
any
comics disappear.
anything else coming down the pipeline that we can hear about, know about?
Just yeah, Avengers Twilight wrapping up.
Right.
Yeah, nothing I can talk about,
Okay.
unfortunately. I've got a couple of new series that should be announced soon. The one thing that is announced is the White Trees and the Whisper Queen. So White Trees is a book I did a few years ago at Image, and now
Mhm.
we're putting it out in a kind of a collected floppy format because it was 2 issues back in the day. I'm just like, well, I want to catch people up. It's me and Chris
Yeah.
Anka and Matt Wilson. Um, Maybe my favorite thing I've done. Like I think
Oh,
it's
wow.
probably the best story that I've been involved with. And Chris and Matt are just amazing artists. So there's a new edition of that coming out to catch you up for the sequel, which is the Whisper Queen, which is a 3 issue
Mhm.
series that's coming out, both of them in May. So yeah,
Sweet.
that's the big one.
Sweet. And then, your home is at Substack on the internet, because
Mhm.
I know you kind of left social media behind, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where everybody can find you. And like I said, it's $5 a month, I think, or something like that. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would recommend just subscribing for free and checking it out and seeing if you
yeah.
like it. Yeah, yeah. It's a good time, I think.
And then I just wanted to end. Do you have any words for any like an up and coming artist like a Ryan Stegman? Any advice for
Say
somebody
like a
like
Ryan
that?
Stegman. Well, Stegman, I'd say give up, but um, yeah. I mean, for artists, like God, it's just a matter of drawing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and the biggest problem I see at conventions when people show me their portfolios is um, they only draw the things they want to draw, which I get. But if you want to do comics, you got to be able to draw cars. You got to be able to
Yes,
draw like street
that's what I've
scenes
heard.
and people and trees and houses and buildings and like all the stuff that you don't necessarily want to draw. Because if you're in it just to draw the characters, you're in it for the wrong reasons. You're going to be really disappointed. If you're in
Yeah.
it to tell a story, then you're going to really want to be able to draw all those things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's the big one.
And for writing, a guy like you just don't be like Mark Waid, right?
Just don't be like Mark Waid. For writing, the hardest part is getting the artist, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you need to publish comics. Like, you can't just like walk into Marvel and be like, I know how to fix Spider-Man. Like, that's just not how it works. It's only ever worked for one guy, and his name is Dan Slott. Um, I mean, almost all people that kind of get into Marvel do it by other work. So
Yeah. Yeah.
self-published or working for smaller companies, and then they have a calling card that they can show these bigger companies. Um, So as a writer, you've got to get an artist, or you
Mhm.
need to learn to draw, which
Yeah.
sounds daunting, but I mean, I've known guys who have done that, and like Ray Fox, the comic writer.
Yeah.
Um, Back when I met him, like he was a writer looking for an artist. He couldn't find one, so he taught himself to draw at the age of 30. And those first drawings weren't very good, but they got to a point where he was able to like kind of self-publish this comic called Nemavore that he
Mhm.
really had a story for. He got into the hands of editors in San Diego, and Vertigo was like, "Yeah, we want to make this comic, but with a different artist," which
Oh.
is great. Like that's the best you
Yeah.
could have hoped for.
Yeah.
And it gave him a lifelong love of drawing, and now he's a great illustrator as well. So, I mean, that's the way. Like, learning to draw is also just a good thing for a comic writer, to become a better writer for
Sure.
comics.
Sure. Even
Like,
if you're just doing like layouts or whatever it is. I mean, guy
yeah,
like Alan Moore and Gaiman both do, they're not great artists, but you know,
almost all the great comic writers were also artists
yeah. Yeah.
on some level. Like even on Daredevil, like Bendis and Brubaker were both cartoonists,
That's right. I love
right?
Brubaker's early stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Like, there's a ton of that in
Yeah.
comics, and it really helps. Matt can draw as well, and he can definitely tell a story. He can storyboard everything.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the all around storytelling, whether it's visual and it's being well rounded at telling stories. But yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you that, and I really appreciate your time, and I really
Yeah,
would
yeah.
love to have you back because
Yeah, for sure.
it's always fun talking comics with people, especially when we're not being angry about it. Um,
I'm not angry about it. Also,
no,
I'm not
no,
online, so I don't know.
that's there you go. That's the ticket. Thanks for listening to another episode. I'll be back next week on Monday mornings. And if you have not, please rate this podcast on Spotify. It's the star rating up at top. I believe Apple has a star rating, plus you can write an actual review. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, hit the like button, throw a comment down below. And I'll see you next week on the damn it, West Coast David. Nope. Direct edition, Canada.